Week 9 was mildly disappointing. I was coming off of a couple of really good weeks in 7 and 8. The season is still looking generally quite good from a betting angle for me. But, week 9 had a couple of things that didn't hit. Seattle lost outright to Buffalo in Buffalo. That Tennessee-Chicago game played under, which was disappointing, but I guess on the bright side, the Giants covered their end of the teaser leg, and I'll be waiting for the Patriots to do the same tonight if they win by one or more against the Jets. In addition to that, the Ravens kind of flukily got through Indianapolis. They ended up winning by 2 scores, but I feel like you had to watch the game to see how lethargic the Ravens offense was. I don't think they look like a serious contender at all at this point. So the Patriots and Jets play tonight. I'm going to save some of that analysis for later. Looking ahead to Week 10, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jets are on byes. And that kind of takes me to the overall biggest takeaway of Week 9, which to me basically reiterates what I thought before the season started. Kansas City is the best team in the NFL because they have the best quarterback with a head coach that can unlock the best within him. I think it's debatable as to whether or not Russell Wilson is better than Mahomes. I think the two are very clearly in a different stratosphere from any other quarterback in the NFL right now. And by the way, just showing how important quarterback play is, both of those teams, roster-wise are not that good, but with those quarterbacks, they are, Super Bowl contenders. And anyway, I think that basically all of the outcomes of games so far with Kansas City just reiterate to me that they are the best team. And they have the most stable quarterback play of any team in the NFL at the highest level. I just feel like as long as Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce are together, or at least like between the two of them, one of those two, between Hill and Kelce, is available for any given game, the Chiefs are favored on a neutral field against any other team in the NFL right now. And, that's exactly what I thought before the season started. That's why I had them, winning the Super Bowl, winning the AFC. To me, it's just, there's a lot of noise out there, but Kansas City really speaks to the signal of what NFL games and what NFL game outcomes are all about. So I think the biggest takeaway with, Pittsburgh looking a little bit shaky against Dallas, which is a weird thing to say. Tennessee, I'm still not totally 100% in on, even though I do like them a lot. I think the only team that can really beat Kansas City is if Kansas City sort of beats themselves in one of these games. And I think that the Chiefs should undeniably be the favorites to win the Super Bowl. I just never understood why Baltimore was sort of right there with them in the betting markets before the season started. Kansas City is this tremendous organization that just came off of a tremendous Super Bowl win, and on the flip side, Baltimore has yet to win a playoff game with Lamar Jackson, let alone beat Patrick Mahomes with Lamar Jackson. So anyway, going to Thursday night, this is actually a pretty good game. Colts and Titans play each other. It's in Tennessee. Titans are favored by 1.5. I got this game at -1 before last week's games were played. I like the Titans to win this game outright. The total is 49. I don't have a good feel for whether or not this game's going to go over or under that total. Tennessee games tend to go over because they do have a very good offense. And what it really comes down to for me is just the Colts defense might be decent, but ultimately I'm not a huge Phillip Rivers fan at this point. I don't think he's got a whole lot left in the tank. I just feel like sometimes he's doing like a little shot put every time he's dropping back to pass and has to throw the ball more than 15 yards downfield. The Colts offense to me is too stagnant. And when I look at Tennessee, Tannehill continues to be pretty good. I know he didn't have a great game against Chicago, but he's at least in an ecosystem that really unlocks the best within him, because I'm so in on A.J. Brown. Before this season started, he was one of my favorite guys in fantasy at the receiver position. He reminds me of a young Julio Jones. And I don't throw around comps like that lightly. it just reminds me of when Julio was first starting to break out. Things just felt so easy for him, like breaking tackles is nothing. He just gallops downfield for 20 yards, averaging, I think, around 20 yards of reception for his career. He is a ridiculously good player. I think he's one of the 6 or 7 best receivers in the NFL. Corey Davis is a good second receiver. Jonnu Smith's a nice player. I think Tennessee has their problems. Offensive line is a little banged up and the defense isn't good, but ultimately I'd rather back Tennessee in a spot like this. And I think that I respect Tennessee's offense too much to put Indianapolis in a teaser. And I think the game might be a little bit too high of a total for me to want a teaser for Indianapolis in this case. So the early slate of games for Sunday of Week 10 is actually a really lousy slate. There's a lot of good evening games, but the 1 o'clock Eastern time games are not so good this week. It starts out with Washington against Detroit. I see here that the Lions are, 4-point favorites. I've also seen them at 3.5. I guess that means Stafford is playing. He left last week with a head injury. It's unclear what Washington is going to do. I think that Alex Smith might be the quarterback. Kyle Allen probably won't be healthy for this game. I don't know what the deal is with Haskins. I don't really expect to see him out there anymore, but this is just a layoff for me. Two teams that clearly aren't very good. Another game that I think people should just completely lay off of, Green Bay, 14-point home favorites against Jacksonville. Jake Luton was decent today against Houston, and Green Bay's defense is actually similarly poor to Houston's, which is, saying quite a bit, I think, considering that Green Bay once upon a time looked like an actual Super Bowl threat from the NFC, and they still might be if their defense regresses a little bit. This is a game I'm not touching. I don't, it's the same thing with, Pittsburgh and Dallas last week. It's like, I don't trust Pittsburgh to cover that many points. I don't trust Dallas to, backdoor cover anything. And this is kind of a similar situation where it's one of the worst teams in the league against a good but flawed team that's probably getting too many points. Tampa Bay's at Carolina. Panthers, I'm seeing here, are 6-point underdogs at home. It's interesting how these two teams have kind of gone in opposite directions based on this past week. I think people are probably going to undervalue Tampa Bay a little bit going into this week, but to be honest with you, Carolina has actually been competent to the point where I don't love the idea of betting against them in this particular spot, considering that they're at home. Carolina's actually kind of hung in there with a lot of decent teams this year. They've been a lot better than I thought. Joe Brady, one of the unsung heroes, of the NFL season, because he's gotten a lot out of that offense compared to what at least my expectations were. I think that offense is operating far above their expectation. They're getting really good play out of guys like Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, even Teddy Bridgewater. The fact that he's throwing in such volume and the team is actually doing pretty well is pretty surprising to me. So this is a game where I feel like Tampa Bay could definitely silence a lot of the critics, but I'm not willing to bet on it. Okay, a game that I do kind of like here, Philadelphia is at the Giants. And I'm going to be honest, I am completely out on Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz, to me right now, is not currently one of the 25 best quarterbacks in the NFL. I might do a quarterback list some other time, but I can definitely name 25 quarterbacks currently in the NFL who I would rather have right now than Carson Wentz. He is atrocious. And last week, and really it's like 2 weeks ago against the Cowboys, the Cowboys were starting Ben DiNucci, who clearly didn't belong on an NFL roster. And the Eagles made a game of it because Carson Wentz played down to his level. I seriously feel like if you switch Wentz and DiNucci in that game, you get like a similar outcome where it's like Wentz just couldn't keep himself from turning the ball over, put the ball in harm's way tons of times. And I've always been a little bit like apprehensive about him. I've never considered him like a top 10 guy, the way that a lot of Eagles fans clearly did once upon a time, because his team won a Super Bowl without him. His team won a Super Bowl with Nick Foles. And he's always getting hurt at the wrong times. That was kind of the biggest thing for me, is like, man, this guy's always injured. I don't want to deal with that. And in addition to that, he's not particularly accurate. He's not a great decision maker. I just don't really know what the benefit is of having Carson Wentz as your quarterback at this point. And so here's the thing. The Eagles might end up winning this division because they win the most games. The Eagles are awful. The Giants are getting 3.5 points at home. This reminds me of 2 or maybe it was 3 weeks ago. Giants and Eagles played on Thursday night. I put the Giants in a teaser because I thought they were getting too many points at home on the road, and I thought the Eagles were just a terrible team. As it turns out, the Eagles ended up winning that game 22-21. They basically pulled that win out of their asses. I thought that was an absolutely terrible performance by Philadelphia. But anyway, I think the Giants, you look at this game, the total's at 44. I think the Giants should be a teaser leg this week. I think 3.5 getting pushed out to 9.5. It's similar to what I did with them this week with Washington. I think the Giants, for all their faults, they've actually hung in there in games this year. The Rams game was a one-score game. The Bears game was a one-score game. They held Tampa Bay to a one-score game, and they almost won that game outright. They did well against the Eagles last time. They hung in there with Dallas. I feel like the Giants are maybe a tiny bit underrated. They're 2-0 against Washington. Hate to say it, but is the better quarterback getting points at home in this game? All right, the final early game of Sunday, Texans are at the Browns. So I think that this is going to be one of those games where if you bet it, you might be irritated at several points during the game. The Browns are favored by 3 at home. This line I've seen at 2.5 as well. Here's the issue with this game that I think a lot of people are going to fall into. Deshaun Watson is clearly the better quarterback, okay? And he's getting points in this game. And I think people are going to look at that and like it. In theory, I agree with you. Here's the issue. Currently in the NFL, Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson are the top 2 quarterbacks by a lot. And I think there's a big drop-off to the next few guys. I think the next few guys, in some order, is probably Brady, Rodgers, and Deshaun Watson. I think Watson's like borderline top 5. He has very quietly put up a tremendous season this year without DeAndre Hopkins. But this team is so bad at so many other levels that it doesn't matter at all. Like the AFC has a relatively wide open feel to it outside of Kansas City. There's a lot of teams kind of vying for that last playoff spot. Browns are one of them. The fact that Houston has Deshaun Watson and they are nowhere near the playoffs is really alarming, and I think that it shows why Bill O'Brien was fired. If you really think about it, what Bill O'Brien has pulled off with this team is actually pretty impressive. The Texans are going to be picking in the top 10 easily this year. And Miami is going to have their first-round pick and their second-round pick in this 2021 draft, which is loaded with talent. The Texans somehow have a bad offensive line, an atrocious defense, and it's not getting any better. I think Houston is a disaster. And look, they have the potential to win this game outright. So I think the move here, because the total is high, is if you love Houston, I think the money line makes more sense than taking the 3 points. But I'm not really feeling the whole Romeo Crennel revenge game. I think this is one of those games where Stefanski's coming off of a bye. The Texans' defense is so utterly bad. The Browns could literally run the ball with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Baker Mayfield might not have to do anything in this game, and the Browns could win by 2 scores. So this is a game I'm generally laying off of. I don't like Houston as a teaser opportunity. I think the total is too high, and I think there's a little bit too much variance involved with the quarterbacks. Okay, so now moving to the evening games, and this is a pretty good group. Buffalo plays Arizona in Arizona. Cardinals are 1.5 point favorites at home. These are 2 of the most maybe surprisingly impressive offensive teams this year. I think Josh Allen and Kyler Murray have both taken steps. I think that they're both, in that group, I mentioned earlier, the top five-ish quarterbacks. I think after those first five guys, it's like, Josh Allen and Kyler Murray are in the conversation. I think you could talk about Drew Brees. You talk about maybe Ryan Tannehill, maybe Matt Ryan, who's been playing better lately. Burrow and Herbert and Tua are kind of like, they're still, we're trying to see like exactly what they are, but I think at least among those three, Burrow to me is the most solid so far. And so anyway, a couple of pretty good quarterbacks, a couple of pretty good offenses. I don't necessarily like the spread on this game. I think there are some weird things happening where Buffalo's traveling from east to west. I think that's something that is not really getting reflected in the line enough. But if you can get this game over 54 points, I think that would be the move. Offense is more stable than defense. Neither of these defenses are good anyway, but both have shown flashes at times of being decent. I would say favor the offenses, stick to what tends to stick, and just, hope for the over in this one. And I think, you'll be rewarded pretty easily. There's going to be probably a lot of points just because of how stably solid these offenses are. So the Chargers are at Miami, battle of two rookie quarterbacks. The Dolphins are 2.5-point favorites at home. Miami looks like they are on the fringe of being a very solid team in the NFL. I definitely like the direction they're going. Flores deserves a lot of credit. I really like what I'm seeing out of Tua, especially this past week against Arizona. He didn't look as good in his first start against the Rams, but the Dolphins have a good roster, and they've got the Texans picks as well as their own picks in this 2021 draft coming up. So their roster is only going to get better. The Chargers continue to help me out as they were my biggest play of the offseason, under 7.5 wins, under 8 wins. They continue to lose these close games. It's really unbelievable. Like, I'm happy about it, but like I feel nervous because Herbert has been a lot better than I thought. Going into this week, I'm not going to make a play on this game. I am interested to watch it just, to kind of figure out a couple things about these quarterbacks and figure out how these teams are doing. I don't know if Miami's earned it yet to be, 2.5-point home favorites is someone that I actually put money on, but they look like the better side to me if I was in like a super contest or something. I think Miami at -2.5. I mean, the Chargers just find ways to lose these games. I think Flores is a better coach than Anthony Lynn. And the Chargers are going from West Coast to East Coast, so there is something to that. They just lost Desmond King at the trade deadline, so, a lot of little things kind of working against the Chargers as usual. Denver is at the Raiders in Las Vegas. The Raiders are 5-point favorites at home. So this is a game I'm not touching. It's in the dead zone. The over-under's at 51. I don't exactly know what to make of that. I think Denver's a really tough team to get a gauge on so far. I just don't really understand how they continue to be kind of involved in close games, but when you actually watch them, Drew Lock is lost a lot of the times. I think Denver might end up being a team where like enough things go well for them to the point where they win like 6 games by accident almost, and then John Elway decides like, oh yeah, we don't need to trade up for Justin Fields, we don't need Trevor Lawrence, we don't need trade Lance, we don't need any rookie quarterback, we're going to stick with Drew Lock. And then for the 2021 season, the Broncos will be probably a pretty favorable underplay for their win total. So anyway, as something that's kind of congruent to that with respect to this game, I don't know what to make of the Raiders exactly. They're 5-3. They look like a decent team, but it's still Derek Carr. I still kind of feel like he's similar to Kirk Cousins, where I really don't love taking him on the spread. I still am not 100% sure John Gruden is that good of a coach. I'm not all that impressed with the Raiders. I feel like they've done some good things this year, but ultimately there's still some stench of defeat from previous seasons that I can't quite get over with them. So I'm going to have to keep on, letting them prove me wrong and letting them prove me wrong in the form of winning games, I guess, before I feel comfortable betting. So Nick Mullins and the 49ers are going to New Orleans to face the Saints. The Saints are now 9-point favorites at home. Total on the game is 51. So this is an interesting line. I think that people are definitely overreacting a little bit to the fact that the Saints played a really masterful game against Tampa Bay on Sunday night. I want to remind people that the Saints offense is still rather lethargic. I know that they looked really good against Tampa Bay. They had no trouble moving the ball. They had a lot of short fields, and they also sort of benefited from having the lead early, I think. The Saints still don't make big plays downfield enough for me to want to back them with a spread this large. This spread really implies the Saints are right there with Kansas City or a team like Seattle, but I don't think they're there. For me, at least not yet. And with larger spreads like this, you need to be able to make plays downfield. I still don't really see that with them. On the other side of things, San Francisco is completely decimated, and not only are they going to be without most of their weapons, maybe they get Ayuk back, maybe they get Kendrick Bourne back, but Nick Mullins, I feel like every other time I watch him, he's actually pretty good, and then for those other times I watch him, he absolutely shits himself and throws a terrible interception. So I don't think Nick Mullins is all that great, and because of that, I'm just going to lay off this game. This is a tough one for me to back one way or the other. All right, here's a game that I actually kind of like. Seattle is at the LA Rams. The Rams are 1.5-point favorites at home. They are coming off of a bye. Seattle coming off of a bad loss to Buffalo. The total on this game I'm seeing is at 55.5. That's a pretty high total. The Seahawks at plus 1.5, I think, is the move here. Now, I love betting on the Seahawks in general because of Russell Wilson, but I have to point something out. So I think if you asked a random Seahawks fan about Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll, they would say, oh, both guys are great. Wilson's a great quarterback and Carroll's a great head coach. Okay, I think the first thing is definitely true. I think the second thing is highly questionable. I've actually been converted into a little bit of a Seahawks fan because way back in February of 2020, I have Seahawks 18-1 to win the Super Bowl, Seahawks 9-1 to win the NFC, because it was really just an investment in Russell Wilson, and I thought, all right, Lockett, Metcalf, these guys are too good for this team to not be really good. Plus, I wanted to fade the Niners for other reasons. Just watching that game against Buffalo this past week, I don't think there's a head coach in the NFL who rides his quarterback more than Pete Carroll rides Russell Wilson to victories. I can't even imagine how bad a team would be if Pete Carroll was in charge of all of the personnel and Wilson was not his quarterback. It literally took Pete Carroll half a decade to figure out, oh yeah, let's throw with the best quarterback in the league on first and second down. In addition to that, now that he's finally letting Wilson throw the ball on first and second and down, he's doing seemingly everything possible to make Wilson's life as difficult as possible. Wilson has had to deal with terrible offensive lines for years. This year, it's not as bad. Dwayne Brown's a good player. So ultimately, it's below average, but it's whatever. The defense, however, is an absolute abomination. And I know that Jamal Adams has been out for most of the year. If he comes back, it's going to help them out. But the way Josh Allen absolutely carved up the Seahawks last week is so inexcusable for Pete Carroll. I mean, he's seriously everything Wilson's doing, all the brilliance of Russell Wilson, all the brilliance of guys like Metcalf and Lockett, it's just getting dragged down by Pete Carroll not being able to figure out how to run an NFL defense. I remember last year they ran, I think they had the most base coverage of any team in the NFL, meaning they were putting linebackers on slot wide receivers, which, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So Pete Carroll's probably a really nice guy. He's probably a good leader, whatever, but he is clearly the issue in Seattle. I think if Seattle had more balls, they would actually move on from him as head coach, but they probably won't do that. I'm pretty sure he got an extension, actually. But anyway, overall, I think the Seahawks get in their way too much. It's mostly Carroll's fault because a lot of the issues go back to him. Wilson is brilliant, so I'm going to take the Seahawks on the spread plus 1.5. But again, you always have to hold your breath with the Seahawks because you never know when, a 2nd and 10 running play is coming at you. Chris Carson, Rashad Penny just, ramming it up the middle of the line of scrimmage for no gain. The Seahawks make things so difficult for themselves. I'm really tired of rooting for them. But again, Wilson, because he's a quarterback and because he's so elite, absolves the Seahawks of a lot of their other issues. So ultimately, I don't love the spot because the Rams are coming off of a bye. But again, this is a spot where it's Wilson against Goff. Even if McVay is in Goff's ear, telling him all the answers, telling him what to do, it's still Wilson against Goff. And I do like Wilson that much more than Jared Goff. Okay, the final evening game here on Sunday. Cincinnati's at Pittsburgh. Steelers are 8-point favorites at home. The total's only at 47.5. So I think if you're in a contest or something where you have to pick the spread of every game, this one feels like a Cincinnati, especially if you can get it at +9. I'm seeing it here at +8, but that feels like a Cincinnati play. I think the more lucrative opportunity here, though, is to take the Steelers as part of a teaser. You can tease the Steelers down from either 9 or 8 down to below a field goal, depending on what, how big of a teaser you do, 6, 6.5. That to me feels like the move. For me at least, I guess it's a little bit of a hedge because I had Cincinnati over 5.5 wins before the season started. That bet is looking okay. I think the Bengals have been good. I'm very impressed with Joe Burrow, but the defense is still atrocious, and I feel like this could be one of those games, similarly to how the Ravens just kind of, beat up on the Bengals. The Steelers could win this game by multiple scores pretty easily without playing that well. But anyway, I do like Cincinnati if you're in a super contest against the spread, but Pittsburgh as a tease, I think makes some sense. On a side note with Pittsburgh, they're 8-0. They're the last unbeaten team in the NFL. I feel very confident that the Kansas City Chiefs are better than the Steelers. And in addition to that, I actually think Tennessee and maybe even Buffalo, depending on maybe how what I decide about Josh Allen, I think Tennessee and Buffalo could potentially be better teams than Pittsburgh as well. The issue I keep on going back to with the Steelers is that, especially we noticed it in the Titans game, Ben Roethlisberger at times is a liability. Okay, there are times where he looks okay, but Roethlisberger isn't one of the 10 best quarterbacks in the league. He might be top 15, you could argue, but ultimately he is a significantly worse player than either Mahomes, I don't know. I guess I would take Tannehill over Ben Roethlisberger at this point. I would take Josh Allen over Roethlisberger at this point. I would even take Lamar Jackson over Roethlisberger at this point, at least because of the rushing value. I just feel like Ben is at a point in his career where you can't really trust him to win games on his own. I think that the Steelers' defense is really the main thing that people are clinging to is why this team is really good. And defense is something that's not as stable over time. Offense is more stable than defense, and so that's why I would favor Mahomes. The one kind of good thing about Pittsburgh is that they have a very good, unique group of playmakers at the receiver and tight end position. So the Sunday night game is Baltimore at New England. The Patriots I'm seeing here are 7-point underdogs at home. Total is 41.5. Very low total, I think. But I think ultimately I'm going to lay off of this game. I think that, so the Patriots and Jets play later today. Obviously, I liked the Patriots over 9 wins going into this season. I thought they were a good buy to win the AFC East. I was obviously wrong about New England. I think that their playmakers are just too poor, and Cam Newton just can't make the throws necessary for this team to be successful. With all of that being said, though, the Patriots are still trying. I think that we found that out last week with Buffalo. They're still like playing to win, I think, for now. Um, I'm going to hold off on this game until we see them against the Jets tonight, because I think we might get some answers about them when they play the Jets. I think that if it turns into like a really low scoring slugfest of a game and the Patriots happen to barely win, we'll figure out that New England is, confirmed not tanking. They are trying to win games. They have a bad record because they've had a really difficult schedule. They did lose to Kansas City. They lost to Seattle. San Francisco, back when they had Kittle and Garoppolo, a very different team than what they are right now. And the Patriots also lost to the Bills, who I think are, a decent team. I will admit that there is a little bit of nervousness from me, at least, about this game tonight with the Jets. Interestingly, I felt better about the Patriots' chances back when Sam Darnold was supposed to be the starter. Now that it's Flacco, the line has actually jumped out to I think 10, which to me is man, if you're backing the Patriots on a 10-point spread against anybody, I feel like that's a difficult thing to do. Not to say that I'm betting on the Jets, because that's also a no for me, but I think that this game could end up being closer than people realize. And there's something about Flacco in his career has always been good against New England, and it's a Braxton Berrios revenge game and everything, so I just feel like there are some things going on where New England always has these really weird losses throughout the year, similar to the one with Denver. So I think this is going to be a low-scoring game tonight, and I'm nervous about it as someone who is rooting for New England for several different bet reasons, including the teaser lag that they're supposed to convert tonight if they win by 1 or more points. All right, and the final game of Week 10, Monday night, Minnesota's at Chicago. And I think this one's a really good game for a teaser. So the Bears are getting 2.5 points at home. Total on the game is 44.5. I'll be honest, Minnesota has actually been a lot better in recent weeks. They've started to kind of get it together offensively. I do like Justin Jefferson. I like Adam Thielen. Dalvin Cook has been really good the past couple of weeks. Even defensively, the Vikings have been a little bit better. But with all of that being said, if you take Minnesota minus 2.5 on the road, you are buying Minnesota at the top of the market, and you are selling Chicago at the bottom of the market. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't think either of these teams are that good. I don't think either of these teams are that much different from one another. But the Bears are going to be at home. They're coming off of a bad loss. And this is a game that they do have to win to compete in the NFC. So I like the Bears getting pushed out from 2.5 out to plus 8.5. I think you could pair that with the Giants getting pushed out from plus 3.5 to plus 9.5. Or you could pair it with the Steelers going from -8 down to -2. I think all of those teasers make a lot of sense this week. Again, total on this game is 44.5, relatively low total. The kicker for me is also that Kirk Cousins is playing on a Monday night. I just feel like it's a Monday night game. He's playing a defense that's actually pretty good in Chicago. It's not great, but it's decent. And it's on the road. I think there's a lot of little things kind of stacking up against the Vikings in this spot. So I do kind of like the Bears, even though I'm ultimately, negative on them. I took their under 8.5 wins before the season started, and I actually still think that bet is surprisingly in play despite their very good start to the season. But anyway, I like the Bears in a teaser as part of a teaser lag for the Monday night game.